January 1848. A man named James Marshall is standing in a ditch in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada in California, knee-deep in freezing water, building a sawmill for a Swiss immigrant named John Sutter. It is early morning. The air is cold enough to see your breath. And then Marshall notices something in the mud at the bottom of the channel, something catching the light in a way that mud is not supposed to catch light. He picks it up. It is about the size of a pea. It is yellow. It's heavy for its size. He bites it. It bends slightly under his teeth. He knows what it is. Within 18 months, the population of California will explode from roughly 14,000 non-indigenous settlers to more than 100,000. 90,000 Americans will pour across plains and mountains through cholera outbreaks and blizzards, leaving behind everything they owned in Ohio, in Georgia, in Massachusetts. They called it a rush. What it actually was the largest voluntary mass migration in American history up to that point, and it was only the beginning. Because gold does not start rushes. Gold starts wars. Gold starts empires. Gold rewrites the laws of nations and the borders of continents. Gold has killed more people and built more civilizations than almost any other substance on Earth. And right now, today, in 2024, there is gold in your phone. There is gold in your laptop. There is gold being traded on the New York Stock Exchange in quantities that would have made Egyptian pharaohs weep with envy. The companies that control it have names you recognize. Some of them have done things they hope you never look up. Here is the story. Gold is older than anything alive. Let that settle for a second. Every other element on Earth, the carbon in your body, the iron in your blood, the oxygen in your lungs, was forged inside stars during nuclear fusion. But gold is different. Gold is so heavy, so dense, that it can only be created in one specific event, the collision of two neutron stars. Not a supernova, not a regular stellar explosion. Only when two collapsed stellar remnants, each one roughly the mass of the sun compressed to the size of a city, collide at a fraction of the speed of light. Only in that specific, almost impossibly rare catastrophe does gold get made. The gold in the ring on your finger was created somewhere between 3 and 5 billion years ago. It predates the sun. It predates Earth itself. It arrived here riding inside the asteroids and meteors that bombarded the young planet during what geologists call the Late Heavy Bombardment, a period roughly 4.1 to 3. 8 billion years ago, when the inner solar system was a target range, and the collisions were so violent and so constant that they literally seeded Earth's crust with the heavy metals that would one day make human civilization possible. Most of that gold sank toward the Earth's core when the planet was still molten. The gold that remained near the surface, the gold that humans have been pulling out of the ground for the last 7,000 years, represents only a tiny fraction of what's actually down there. Geologists estimate that Earth's core contains enough gold to coat the entire surface of the planet to a depth of about 1.5 feet. We will never reach it. It is 3,000 miles straight down. The gold we can reach formed in a different way. Heat and pressure forced hydrothermal fluids through cracks in the Earth's crust, depositing dissolved gold in veins of quartz rock deep underground. The slow movement of tectonic plates pushed those veins toward the surface over millions of years. Rivers eroded the rock, broke the veins apart, and carried particles of pure gold downstream, where they settled in the bends of river channels and the gravel of riverbeds, exactly where James Marshall was standing in 1848. People were working gold 7,000 years before the United States existed as a country. The earliest confirmed gold artifacts come from the Varna necropolis in what is now Bulgaria. a burial site excavated in the 1970s that contained more than 3,000 gold objects dating to roughly 4,600 BC. When archaeologists opened those graves, they found people buried with gold crowns, gold bracelets, gold-handled tools. Not kings, not pharaohs. Ordinary people of a pre-Bronze Age culture who had developed enough social complexity to produce specialists, people whose only job was to work metal. Thousands of years before the Roman Empire existed, thousands of years before Greece was Greece. The objects were stunning, hammered thin, precisely formed, decorated with geometric patterns that required real aesthetic intention. These were not crude. They were beautiful. Someone spent real hours making them beautiful, which tells you something important. Gold was not originally valuable because of what it could buy. It was valuable because of what it meant, because of how it looked, because it did not tarnish, did not rust, did not rot, did not change. In a world where everything decayed, where wood rotted, where bronze corroded, where fabric disintegrated, gold stayed gold forever. That permanence was not a property. It was a miracle. The Egyptians were not the first people to work gold, but they were the first to build an empire around it. The Nile Valley sits at the edge of one of the richest gold-producing regions on Earth. The desert hills of Nubia, what is now southern Egypt and northern Sudan, contained gold deposits that Egyptian miners were exploiting as early as 3500 BC, more than 5,500 years ago. By the time of the New Kingdom pharaohs, the era of Tutankhamun, Ramesses II, Hatshepsut, Egypt was producing somewhere between 3 and 5 metric tons of gold per year, roughly 6.6 to 11 million pounds over the course of the empire's peak centuries. At today's prices, that annual output would be worth somewhere between $190 million and $320 million every year. For centuries. And the Egyptians did not hide it. They wore it. They buried it. They covered the walls of their temples with it. When Howard Carter opened Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922, the innermost coffin, the one that held the mummy itself, was solid gold. Not gold-plated, solid. It weighed 243 pounds, and at modern prices is worth somewhere in the neighborhood of $5 million for the metal alone. The artistic value is incalculable, but here is what most people miss about Egyptian gold. It was not just jewelry. Gold was theology. The flesh of the gods, according to Egyptian religious texts, was made of gold. The bones of the gods were silver. The hair of the gods was lapis lazuli, a deep blue stone imported from what is now Afghanistan. Gold was divine substance. When a pharaoh wore gold, he was not displaying wealth the way a rapper displays a chain. He was claiming to be made of the same material as Ra, as Osiris, as Horus. The gold was a theological statement about his nature. He was not a man who owned gold, he was partly gold himself. This is the gap that modern observers always miss when they look at ancient gold artifacts. The sacred and the commercial had not yet separated. Gold was not being used as currency in the modern sense. It was being used as compressed divinity, as a material that carried the weight of the universe's permanent things. The mining system that produced all of this gold was one of the most brutal in the ancient world. Egyptian gold mines in Nubia, documented in a papyrus from around 1500 BC that is essentially the oldest surviving mine map in human history, used enslaved prisoners of war, convicted criminals, and people who had simply been in the wrong place when Egyptian armies swept through neighboring territories. The Greek historian Diodorus Siculus, writing roughly 2,000 years ago, described what he had learned about Egyptian gold mines with a level of detail that is hard to read. Workers, including children, crawled through tunnels so low they could not stand, chipping at quartz rock with iron tools by the light of clay oil lamps. The heat was described as barely survivable. Workers were not allowed to stop. Guards stood at the tunnel entrances. The death rate was, in Diodorus's words, so high that the mines were staffed entirely by people who had no hope of leaving alive. By the time the Egyptians had perfected their gold industry, the metal had become too important and too politically charged to stay inside Egypt's borders. The surrounding kingdoms wanted it. The trade routes that gold created would reshape the ancient world. The first major gold trade network in history ran from Nubia northward through Egypt and then branched across the Mediterranean and into the Near East. By roughly 1500 BC, gold was flowing in quantities large enough to shape the foreign policy of multiple empires simultaneously. Egyptian pharaohs sent gold as diplomatic gifts to the kings of Babylon, of Assyria, of the Hittite Empire. The Amarna letters, a collection of clay tablets discovered in Egypt in the 1880s that preserve actual diplomatic correspondence from around 350 BC, include letter after letter from foreign kings begging Egypt for gold. The king of Babylon writes to Pharaoh Akhenaten, "In your country, gold is as plentiful as dirt." That is not a metaphor. That was the perception from outside. The trade routes that carried gold stretched distances that are hard to visualize without an American comparison. The main overland route from the gold fields of sub-Saharan West Africa to the ports of the Mediterranean coast, the route that would fuel empires for the next 3,000 years, covered more than 3,000 miles. That is approximately the same as driving from New York City to Los Angeles and continuing another 700 miles into the Pacific Ocean. Human caravans walked it through the Sahara in temperatures that regularly hit 120 degrees Fahrenheit in summer for gold. The ancient Greeks encountered gold primarily through trade with Lydia, a kingdom in what is now Western Turkey, and through conquest. The Lydians are credited with minting the first standardized gold and silver coins, roughly around 600 BC, a development so consequential that it is impossible to overstate. Before coinage, gold was traded by weight. You melted it, weighed it, argued about purity. Lydian coins standardized the unit. Suddenly you could store value in a portable form. Suddenly wealth could travel without a scale. The modern economy, the entire concept of currency, traces a direct line back to Lydian workshops in the 600s BC. The territory that changed hands specifically because of gold during the Greek and Persian era was enormous. When Alexander the Great conquered Persia in 330 BC and sacked the Persian treasury at Persepolis, he captured a quantity of gold and silver so vast that it took 20,000 mules and 5,000 camels to carry it. Historians estimate the haul was worth somewhere between $300 billion and $500 billion in today's dollars. It was the largest single transfer of wealth in human history up to that point. And Alexander spent it quickly, paying his army, funding new cities, building infrastructure across an empire that stretched from Greece to the edge of what is now Pakistan. A territory, if you laid it over a modern map, larger than the continental United States. But all of this, the Egyptians, the Lydians, the Greeks, the Persians, was prologue. Because the era of gold that shaped the world Americans live in today was not ancient, it was modern, and it was far more violent than most people realize. The moment everything changed was not in Egypt or Greece, it was in a mountain range in South America in the early 1500s. And the consequences are still playing out in American foreign policy, American banking law, and American consumer products right now. Before we go any further, if you're new here, this channel covers the real history behind the things that shape the world and that are still shaping your life right now. No filler, no fluff, just the actual story with actual numbers. We put out a new one every week. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, whether you're in Texas, in Ohio, in California, or somewhere you wouldn't expect. I genuinely want to know where these stories land, Now, back to gold, and things are about to get significantly darker. In 1519, a Spanish conquistador named Hernán Cortés landed on the coast of what is now Mexico with roughly 600 men. He was not authorized to be there. He had defied direct orders from the Spanish governor of Cuba to turn his fleet around. He burned his own ships after landing so his men could not retreat. And then he marched into the interior of a continent with 600 soldiers against a civilization of millions. The Aztec Empire at its peak controlled a territory roughly the size of present-day California and Nevada combined. It had a capital city, Tenochtitlan, on an island in a lake in the central Mexican plateau, with a population somewhere between 200,000 and 400,000 people. That made it one of the largest cities on Earth at the time. London in 1519 had maybe 50,000 people. Paris had around 100,000. Tenochtitlan had more people than any city in Western Europe, and it had gold. The Aztec ruler Moctezuma II, operating on a misreading of religious prophecy that Cortés was a returning god, initially welcomed the Spanish. He gave them gifts. The gifts included gold, headdresses, discs, jewelry of a craftsmanship that made the Spanish soldiers go silent when they saw it. One of Cortés's soldiers, Bernal Díaz del Castillo, later wrote that when they first entered Tenochtitlan and saw the gold objects in the royal treasury, the men stood speechless. Not because of the quantity, though the quantity was staggering, because of the beauty. Cortés melted it all down. The Aztec gold was not art to the Spanish crown. It was raw material. It was liquidity. It was the answer to Spain's chronic debt problem. Cortés had the objects cast into bars, marked with the royal seal, loaded onto ships, and sent back to Spain. The famous Montezuma's ransom, the gold given to the Spanish during their first months in Tenochtitlan, was worth somewhere in the range of $50 to $80 million in today's dollars. Just the first shipment. What followed the conquest of the Aztecs was the conquest of the Incas. Francisco Pizarro led 168 Spanish soldiers into the Peruvian highlands in 1532 and captured the Inca emperor Atahualpa. Atahualpa, understanding the Spanish obsession, offered a ransom that is still difficult to believe even now. He would fill a room roughly 17 feet long by 22 feet wide to a height of about 8 feet. Once with gold, twice with silver. The room exists, the measurements were recorded, the gold came in. Inca nobles stripped temples, removed decorative panels, carried artwork from hundreds of miles away, all to fill that room. The total quantity of gold involved is estimated at roughly 24 tons, which at modern prices would be worth somewhere around $1.5 billion. The Spanish collected it, melted it, loaded it into ships, and killed Atahualpa anyway. Over the next 150 years, Spain extracted gold and silver from the Americas on a scale that fundamentally rewrote the global economy. The silver mines of Potosí in modern-day Bolivia, which we'll come back to, produced so much metal that the Spanish crown's American treasure fleets became the primary driver of global monetary expansion. Roughly 80% of the world's silver supply from 1500 to 1800 came from Spanish-American mines. The gold flowed to Spain, and from Spain into the hands of European bankers, merchants, and manufacturers. It funded the wars of the Habsburg dynasty. It built the cathedrals of Seville and Salamanca. It financed the Counter-Reformation. And it created the template for extraction capitalism that would define Western economies for the next 5 centuries. Find a place with resources, use force to take the resources, process the resources elsewhere, sell the finished product to consumers who never see where it came from. That template did not stay in Spanish America. It crossed the Atlantic, and Americans have been living inside its consequences ever since. The question that serious historians have been wrestling with for centuries is this: how many people died to produce the gold and silver that built the early modern global economy? The answer is somewhere between devastating and incalculable. The Spanish colonial system in the Americas used a labor regime called the meter, a system of forced labor drafted from indigenous communities. In theory, it was a rotation. Communities sent a fixed percentage of their able-bodied men to work the mines for a period of months, and the men were paid a wage. In practice, it was a death sentence delivered slowly. Miners in the silver and gold operations of Peru and Mexico worked in conditions that made Egyptian Nubian mines look humane. The silver mine at Potosi, called Cerro Rico, which translates to Rich Mountain, operated continuously from its founding in 1545 until well into the 1800s. The mountain is in southern Bolivia at an altitude of nearly 16,000 feet. That is almost 2 miles higher than Denver. At that altitude, without acclimatization, ordinary physical labor is genuinely dangerous. The miners worked underground, in tunnels choked with dust and mercury vapor. Mercury was used to refine silver, breathing air that destroyed lungs over months. They worked shifts that were measured not in hours, but in weeks. Workers who entered the mountain were sometimes not permitted to leave until an entire shift was complete. The church built a chapel at the mine entrance because everyone understood that workers going in might not be coming out. Historians estimate that between 8 and 12 million people died at Potosi and the surrounding mine complexes over the 3 centuries of Spanish colonial operation. To put that in terms that make the number real, that is the equivalent of the current combined population of the states of Colorado, Nevada, Utah, New Mexico, and Wyoming. Every single person in those 5 states, gone, in one complex, over 300 years. The African slave trade that fed the Caribbean gold and silver operations added another layer. West African enslaved people were shipped, in conditions that are almost beyond description, across the Atlantic to work mines and plantations in Cuba, Hispaniola, Jamaica, and Brazil. The Middle Passage killed somewhere between 1.5 and 2 million people during the crossing alone, in addition to the millions who died in captivity and labor on the other side. American ports were deeply involved. Charleston, South Carolina, Baltimore, Newport, Rhode Island. American ships carried enslaved people. American merchants financed the voyages. American consumers purchased goods refined by enslaved labor, including gold jewelry, sugar, cotton, and tobacco. The gold rush of 1849 in California, which felt like a fresh American story, an American adventure, followed a template that had been running for 300 years in Latin America and the Caribbean. Different mountain range. Same extraction logic, same willingness to exploit anyone standing between white settlers and the gold in the ground. The indigenous populations of California, already decimated by Spanish mission colonization, were further destroyed by the gold rush. An estimated 100,000 native Californians died between 1846 and 1870 through violence, disease, starvation, and displacement. The California state government in the early 1850s explicitly funded armed expeditions against indigenous communities, calling them Indian Wars, and paid militias from the state treasury. The governor of California, Peter Burnett, said in his State of the State address in 1851 that a war of extermination will continue to be waged between the races until the Indian race becomes extinct. He said that publicly, in an official address. It is in the record, and it was paid for, in part, by gold. American households were the end destination for the wealth generated by this system. American banks were built on it. The financial architecture of the eastern United States in the mid-19th century the banks of New York, the trading houses of Boston, the shipping firms of New Orleans, was directly funded by the extraction economy that gold created. Gold has started more wars than almost any other cause in human history, and the United States has not been a spectator. The Spanish-American War of 1898 is taught in American schools primarily as a story about Cuba, the Maine, yellow journalism, and Teddy Roosevelt charging up San Juan Hill. What is taught less often is that Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines, the primary territories the United States seized from Spain in the aftermath, were all connected to gold and precious metal supply chains. The Philippines in particular contained significant gold deposits that American mining companies moved to exploit within years of the island's annexation. The Benguet gold mines in the mountains of northern Luzon were being operated under American corporate ownership by the early 1900s. The California gold rush itself, the one that started with James Marshall in that ditch in 1848, directly triggered the Mexican-American War's aftermath. The Bear Flag Revolt, the military occupation of California, and the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848 transferred what is now California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Wyoming from Mexico to the United States. That transfer covered 525,000 square miles, a territory larger than Alaska and nearly 1/4 of the current continental United States. It happened the same year gold was discovered at Sutter's Mill. The timing was not a coincidence. The gold standard, the monetary policy of tying the US dollar to a fixed quantity of gold, was one of the most consequential and contested policy debates in American political history. From the Civil War until 1971, American monetary policy was shaped by the question of how much gold the government held. The populist movement of the 1890s, farmers drowning in debt, demanding that the money supply expand to give them relief, fought the gold standard in every election, culminating in William Jennings Bryan's famous Cross of Gold speech in 1896, in which he told the Eastern banking establishment, "You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold." Bryan lost. The gold standard won. And rural America, particularly the Midwest and the South, paid the price in deflation, foreclosure, and poverty for another generation. Quick question: how much gold do you think the average American owns right now, in one form or another? Think about your jewelry, your electronics, your retirement account. Drop your guess in the comments. The actual number is going to surprise you. The two world wars created gold crises that permanently reshaped American financial power. During World War I, European nations abandoned the gold standard to print money to fund their militaries. Gold flowed out of Europe and into the United States, which had stayed on the gold standard and was selling weapons and goods to all sides. By the end of World War I, the United States held roughly 40% of the world's above-ground gold supply. That concentration of gold gave American bankers and policymakers a leverage over global finance that they had never had before, and that they used to construct the international financial architecture of the 20th century. The Bretton Woods Agreement of 1944, negotiated at a hotel in New Hampshire toward the end of World War II, established the US dollar as the world's reserve currency. Every other currency was pegged to the dollar, and the dollar was pegged to gold at $35 per ounce. The entire international monetary system rested on the United States government's guarantee that it held enough gold to back every dollar in circulation. It didn't. By 1971, the gap between the dollars in circulation and the gold in Fort Knox had become impossible to sustain. Foreign governments, led by France, which had been quietly converting its dollar reserves to gold for years, were demanding payment in gold, and the United States was running out. On August 15, 1971, President Richard Nixon went on national television and announced that the United States was suspending the convertibility of the dollar to gold. Just like that, with a 15-minute address, the monetary system that had governed global finance since 1944 ended. Economists call this Nixon's decision. Historians call it a crisis. What it actually was the moment gold stopped being money and became something else, a commodity, an investment, a store of value outside the banking system. The price of gold, which had been fixed at $35 an ounce for decades, was suddenly free to find its market level. Within 10 years, it hit $850 an ounce. In 2020, it crossed $2,000 an ounce for the first time. For a moment in 1980, it looked like gold's price spike was a temporary panic. The price fell sharply from its $850 peak and stayed relatively flat for 2 decades. It looked like the worst was behind us. It wasn't. Here is what changed everything about gold in the 20th century: the electronics revolution. Gold is not just pretty. It is one of the most electrically conductive materials on Earth, and unlike copper or silver, it does not corrode or tarnish. That means it maintains electrical conductivity indefinitely. In the world of microelectronics, where a failed connection inside a circuit board can destroy an entire device, gold is the only material that reliably works. Every computer chip, every circuit board, every high-end electrical connector uses gold. Your iPhone contains somewhere between 0.034 and 0.034 grams of gold. Your laptop contains more. A single ton of iPhone circuit boards, by weight, contains more gold than 17 tons of gold ore from a modern mine. The consumer electronics industry became one of the largest consumers of gold in the world, alongside jewelry and central bank reserves. The global electronics industry uses somewhere between 250 and 300 metric tons of gold per year. That is roughly 550 to 660 million pounds, making it the second largest industrial user of gold after the jewelry sector. American companies are at the center of this. Apple, Intel, IBM, Texas Instruments. Every major American semiconductor and electronics manufacturer sources gold for its production processes. The gold used in those chips comes primarily from 3 places: South Africa, Russia, and China, with significant contributions from Australia, Canada, Peru, and Ghana. The supply chains are long, opaque, and, in several documented cases, connected to environmental and human rights disasters that have been systematically hidden from American consumers. The mining of gold for electronics is not clean. Open-pit gold mining operations in Nevada, the United States is actually a significant gold producer, with Nevada responsible for about 73% of domestic production, use a process called heap leach cyanide extraction. Crushed ore is piled into enormous pits lined with plastic sheeting. Cyanide solution is dripped over the pile. The cyanide dissolves the gold, and the resulting solution drains into collection ponds. The gold is then precipitated out. The process works. It is also one of the most environmentally destructive industrial processes currently operating inside the United States. Cyanide solution is acutely toxic to nearly all life forms. A spill from a heap leach operation can sterilize a river for miles. The lined pits leak. The EPA has documented dozens of contamination incidents at gold mining operations across Nevada, Montana, and Colorado. The Summitville mine in southern Colorado, a gold mining operation that operated through the 1980s and early 1990s, discharged acidic, cyanide-laced water into the Alamosa River, killing all aquatic life for 17 miles downstream. The cleanup cost American taxpayers more than $200 million. The mining company had declared bankruptcy before the cleanup bill arrived, leaving federal and state governments meaning American citizens, to pay for a private company's environmental destruction. And that was just one mine. What I haven't told you yet is what the people selling you gold right now already know and have known for decades. In 2010, a small team of investigators at Global Witness, a British-based non-profit that tracks resource-related corruption, began documenting something they called conflict gold. The term had been used informally for years, but what Global Witness found was specific. Gold extracted in war zones, primarily in the Democratic Republic of Congo, was flowing through legitimate international trading channels and ending up in electronics assembled by American companies and sold in American stores. The DRC conflict is one of the deadliest ongoing humanitarian crises on Earth. Since 1998, the wars in eastern Congo, fueled in significant part by competition over gold, coltan, tin, and other minerals, have killed an estimated 5 to 6 million people. That is the equivalent of the entire population of the state of Wisconsin. And for much of that period, some of the gold mined by armed groups in Congo was making its way through a laundering chain, from artisanal miners working at gunpoint, through middlemen in Rwanda and Uganda, into the international gold market, refined in Swiss and Indian processing facilities, and then sold to electronics manufacturers who asked no questions and were required by law to ask none. The key word is required, because for years no law required them to. American electronics companies, Apple, Intel, Motorola Solutions and others, were buying gold that could not be traced to its origin. The industry knew this was a problem. Internal documents from industry trade groups show that companies were aware by the mid-2000s that their supply chains had exposure to conflict minerals. They responded by funding industry-led initiatives that produced voluntary guidelines. Voluntary, with no enforcement mechanism, no auditing requirement, no penalty for non-compliance. The US government finally acted, sort of, with Section 1502 of the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act, passed in 2010. Section 1502 required publicly traded American companies to disclose whether their products contained conflict minerals, including gold, sourced from the DRC or neighboring countries, and to conduct due diligence on their supply chains if they did. It was the first time the US government had required American corporations to account for where their minerals came from. The industry lobbied against it immediately. The National Association of Manufacturers, the US Chamber of Commerce, and a coalition of electronics companies spent years in court challenging Section 1502 on First Amendment grounds, arguing, essentially, that being required to disclose where your gold came from violated your freedom of speech. In 2014, the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals partially agreed, striking down the provision requiring companies to label their products as DRC conflict-free or not. The disclosure requirement survived, but the labeling that would have let consumers make informed choices did not. This is the part that should make you angry. The system that allowed conflict gold to enter American supply chains was not an accident. It was the predictable outcome of a decision made by American industry groups and enabled by American lawmakers to treat supply chain transparency as a regulatory burden rather than a human rights obligation. The people paying the price were 5 million Congolese civilians. The people who profited were American shareholders, and the gold supply chain problem is not ancient history. This is still happening, right now, in the United States. The conflict mineral story is the most documented version of gold's modern scandal, but it sits inside a larger pattern that has been running for over a century. The consistent willingness of the American gold industry, mining companies, refiners, jewelry manufacturers, and electronics makers to externalize costs onto communities, ecosystems, and foreign populations while capturing the profits. The mechanism is always the same. Step 1. Identify a resource. Step 2. Extract it as cheaply as possible. Step 3. When the environmental or human costs become undeniable, spend money on lawyers and lobbyists rather than on fixing the problem. Step 4. Declare bankruptcy if the liability becomes too large and leave the cleanup to the government, meaning taxpayers. The EPA's Superfund list, the list of the most contaminated sites in the United States requiring federal cleanup funding, contains more than 50 sites associated with metal mining operations, including gold. Total estimated cleanup costs for all Superfund sites currently exceed $70 billion. American taxpayers are paying that bill. The companies that created those sites, some of them still in operation, some long dissolved, do not pay the bill. Their shareholders do not pay the bill. Their executives do not pay the bill. You pay the bill. The revolving door between the gold mining industry and the agencies meant to regulate it is well documented. Former executives of mining companies have served at the EPA and the Interior Department, the two agencies with the most power to regulate mining operations on federal land. Interior Department policies on hard rock mining, including gold mining, have historically allowed companies to mine on federal land, extract billions of dollars worth of minerals, and pay no royalties to the federal government. American oil companies pay royalties to drill on federal land. American natural gas companies pay royalties. Hard rock miners, including gold miners, historically paid nothing under a law called the General Mining Act of 1872, passed during the Grant administration. Still substantially in effect today, the General Mining Act of 1872 gives mining companies the right to mine gold and other hard rock minerals on most federal land for a patent fee that has not been meaningfully updated since Ulysses S. Grant was president. Companies have purchased rights to federal land containing billions of dollars in minerals for application fees of $2.50 per acre, $2.50 per acre for gold-bearing land. While the rest of us pay market rates for everything, the estimated loss to the U.S. Treasury from the failure to collect royalties on hard rock mining over the last few decades runs into the hundreds of billions of dollars. Every school that wasn't built, every road that wasn't paved, every veteran who didn't get care, that money went somewhere. It went into the profit margins of gold mining companies. The human health consequences inside American communities near gold mines are documented and serious. Communities near Nevada's Carlin Trend, one of the world's richest gold mining districts, have reported elevated arsenic levels in well water, respiratory problems linked to dust from open pit operations, and contaminated aquifers that have required expensive remediation. The residents of these communities are not wealthy. They are ranchers, agricultural workers, and small-town families who own the land above the aquifer, but cannot always afford to test the water coming out of it. The cover-up that surrounds these harms is not the dramatic kind, not a single industry memo ordering the suppression of data. It is structural. It is built into the regulatory system by decades of lobbying. The mining industry spends tens of millions of dollars every year on campaign contributions to members of Congress who sit on committees overseeing the EPA and the Interior Department. The Center for Responsive Politics has documented that the mining industry donated heavily to both parties' members of the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee across multiple election cycles. Both parties. The regulatory failure is bipartisan. The specific moment when the cover started visibly unraveling was in 2015, when EPA workers, government employees working on a Superfund cleanup, accidentally triggered the Gold King mine blowout in Colorado. An access tunnel at an abandoned gold mine in the San Juan Mountains collapsed, releasing approximately 3 million gallons of acidic metal-laden wastewater into Cement Creek, which flows into the Animas River. The water turned orange. The Navajo Nation, which uses the San Juan River downstream, declared a state of emergency. Agricultural operations along the river were shut down. The contamination spread into Utah and New Mexico. The company that operated the Gold King mine before it was abandoned, it had declared bankruptcy decades earlier. The cleanup cost paid by American taxpayers. The EPA's response to the blowout it triggered, which included initially underestimating the volume of the release and being slow to notify downstream communities, was investigated by the EPA Inspector General. The Navajo Nation filed suit against the EPA. The litigation took years. The tribal communities that lost a summer's worth of agricultural water and a river's worth of fish received a settlement that most observers considered inadequate. The industry knew. Decades of abandoned mines with inadequate reclamation bonds, decades of lobbying against royalty reform, decades of supply chain opacity. And they kept going, while Americans and the communities around the world producing gold for American consumers paid the price. The United States is not a passive consumer of gold. It is the largest single-country importer of gold jewelry in the world. Americans buy somewhere between 120 and 150 metric tons of gold jewelry per year, roughly 264 to 330 million pounds. The US gold market generates approximately $50 billion annually across jewelry, electronics, industrial applications, and investment products. That is more than the entire GDP of the state of Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine combined. The gold in American consumer life is everywhere, and most people never notice it. The thin gold plating on the USB-C connector on your phone charger, the gold contacts inside the SIM card slot of your Android, the gold bonding wires inside the processor in your laptop, wires so fine they are measured in microns, thinner than a human hair, connecting the chip to the circuit board at speeds measured in billionths of a second. The gold in your wedding ring or your grandmother's necklace, purchased at Zales or Jared or Kay Jewelers or Walmart's jewelry counter. The gold coins in the retirement portfolio your financial advisor put you in when the market got volatile. The American Gold Eagle coins minted by the US Mint in West Point, New York. Using gold sourced from mines that may or may not have paid a royalty to the federal government. The exchange-traded funds, the gold ETFs trading on the New York Stock Exchange under tickers like GLD and IAU, hold a combined 1,000+ metric tons of physical gold in vaults in London and New York, and they are owned in part by millions of ordinary American investors who hold them inside their 401ks. You may own gold right now without knowing it. If you have a diversified index fund in your retirement account, there is a decent chance that some fraction of it is exposed to gold through the mining company stocks that gold ETFs hold. The gold sitting in Fort Knox, the United States government's official gold reserve, totals approximately 147.3 million troy ounces, or roughly 4,580 metric tons. At current prices, that is worth somewhere around $280 billion. Fort Knox has not been independently audited since 1953. The last members of Congress to physically inspect the gold there did so in 1974. The government's claim that the gold is there is not verified by any external auditor. This is a fact. It is not a conspiracy theory. It is simply the operational reality of how the United States manages its gold reserve on the honor system, self-reported, unverified by any third party for 70 years. Gold's story does not end anywhere. It just keeps going, in new forms, wearing new faces, making the same promises. Here is what 7,000 years of gold history actually reveals. The commodity itself is almost irrelevant. Gold is not uniquely special among resources. What is special, what is constant, is the human behavior that gold makes visible. The way that a resource of concentrated value, once discovered, immediately attracts the people with the most power. The way that power organizes itself around extraction. The way that extraction always, without exception, runs on the labor of people who are not consulted and not compensated fairly. The way that the profits concentrate upward while the costs spread downward, onto workers, onto communities, onto ecosystems, onto governments that eventually hand the bill to taxpayers. This is the pattern. It ran in Egypt in 1500 BC. It ran in Potosi in 1600 AD. It ran in California in 1849. It runs in the Congo right now. It runs in Nevada right now. The technology changes. The corporate structure changes. The legal language changes. The pattern does not. If you're sitting there thinking, this sounds like every other industry you've ever heard of, you're right. This is the pattern. This is how it always goes. The resource is different each time. The logic is identical. How many things in your life right now were built on a decision someone made in a boardroom that you never got to vote on? Take a moment with that. There's no easy answer. There isn't supposed to be. Gold was supposed to be different, you know? That's the thing about gold. It was the first thing humans ever pointed to and said, this is what value looks like. This is permanent. This is real. And then we spent 7,000 years discovering that we were wrong. Not about the gold, about ourselves. The gold was just sitting in the ground. We brought everything else to it. The gap between what America says it believes, in fair markets, in transparency, in the rule of law applied equally, and what the gold industry has actually done inside American borders, with American regulators looking the other way, is exactly the width of the General Mining Act of 1872, a law older than the light bulb, still on the books, still in effect, still generating profits for mining companies and unpaid bills for American taxpayers. That gap is not a failure of the market. It is the market working exactly as it was designed to work when powerful interests write the rules. And the story of gold is, in the end, the story of who gets to write the rules and who pays when the rules are wrong. The next time you see gold in a jewelry store window, in the gleam of a circuit board, in the yellow bar on a financial news channel's ticker, you'll know what you're actually looking at. You're looking at the oldest economic story on Earth, still running, still taking the same shape, still asking the same people to carry the same weight. Have you ever looked at something you own? Your phone, your wedding ring, a piece of jewelry you inherited, and wondered exactly where it came from and what it cost to get to you? Drop that in the comments. Tell me what you were thinking about. I read every single one, and the answers people leave shape what I cover next. Some of the best follow-up stories I've ever done started in the comments section. If this is the kind of story you want more of, the real history behind the things that run your life, told without the sanitized version, subscribe. Every subscriber helps this channel reach more people who deserve to know this stuff, and it genuinely keeps this going. Hit the like button. It matters more than most people realize. It tells me you want to keep going deeper, and it helps this reach people who are ready to hear it. Turn on notifications. The next story is already in the works, and you will not want to come in late on this one. Share this with someone who thinks they already know how the world works, someone who thinks the global economy is basically fair, basically transparent, basically regulated. Show them what they missed. And the next time you're at Walmart or Costco or the jewelry counter at your local mall, the next time you pick up something gold or something that contains gold or something that was made possible by gold, you'll know what you're holding. You're holding 7,000 years of the same story. Empires that rose and fell, miners who never saw the profits, regulators who looked away, shareholders who cashed out. And the gold itself, ancient, permanent, indifferent, sitting in the ground since before the sun existed, waiting for the next person to decide it was worth everything. That's not just history, that's what's in your pocket right now.